All right, good afternoon, and welcome to the first lecture of the 2026 spring season of the Frankfort Heritage Lecture Series, and our 30th lecture in total. Thank you all for coming. My name is John Carlton, and I'm the organizer of the Frankfort Heritage Week Coalition and the co-organizer of this lecture series. As always, I want to give a big thanks to Paul Sawyer Public Library for hosting us, and to my co-organizer, Adult Services Manager Diane Dehoney, for everything she and her staff do for the lectures and the community. And of course, thanks to Frankfort Plant Board and Cable 10 for taping these lectures and hosting them on their YouTube channel, and thanks to the State Journal for giving us some great additional publicity. Specifically for this season, we're excited to have partnered with the Kentucky Historical Society's America 250 KY Commission to bring you a special lineup of special speakers and special themes. Since its beginning in October of 2023, the lecture series was always intended to march us toward America 250 by exploring Frankfort's history through the layered lens of local, state, and national themes, providing new, updated, and sometimes untold perspectives on the people, places, and events that shaped who we are today. And there's no better place to start that story this season than with the Kentucky River, shedding light on how the power of place contributes to the formation of identity. After all, we too are part of the biological heritage of the Kentucky River. I do want to give a brief overview of this season's lineup, since last month's lecture had to be rescheduled due to the snowstorm. Of course, today we are excited to kick off the season with Dr. Jim Tidwell, Professor Emeritus of Kentucky State University's Aquaculture and Aquatic Sciences program, a program of distinction, internationally recognized for innovative research, unique full-service facilities, and for making a significant impact on sustainable food systems. Dr. Tidwell is joined by Mr. Doug Henley, a retired fisheries biologist from the Kentucky Department for Fish and Wildlife Resources, both here in Frankfort, to tell the story of the history of the Kentucky River, how history affects biology and biology affects history, as well as the interplay with the development of Frankfort and the state. Next, on February 7th at 1 o'clock, researcher and collector Sharon Cox will share the story of Harry Mordecai, African-American plasterer and bricklayer in early Frankfort, a former enslaved person who became free and then an enslaver himself, who is responsible for the plaster and brickwork at two of Frankfort's National Historic Landmarks, the old state capitol and the Orlando Brown House on the Liberty Hall Historic Site campus, as well as other buildings around Frankfort. On March 14th at 1 o'clock, the Kentucky Historical Society's Civil War Governors of Kentucky project manager, Dr. Chuck Welsko, will present Commanding the Capital, Early Kentucky Governors and Their Role in Shaping Kentucky, exploring how early gubernatorial office holders wielded Kentucky's power and their role in shaping the state and the United States' westward expansion during the state's first century. On April 11th at 1 o'clock, we will return to the Kentucky River with author and historian Chuck Bogart to discuss commerce on the Kentucky River, from early flatboats through the steamboat and railroad eras, and how the Kentucky River's trade of timber, tobacco and hemp, coal, oil, and yes, even people shaped Frankfort's and Kentucky's early development. On May 9th at 1 o'clock, historian and museum curator Nikki Hughes returns to share There's Something in the Air of Kentucky That Makes a Man a Soldier, the history of the Kentucky Militia and National Guard, exploring early local, state, and national security issues and how the evolution of these executive institutions played essential roles in the nation's wars and peacetime life. Lastly, on June 13th, the current managing editor for Enterprise at Politico and former editorial page editor at the Boston Globe, Peter Cantalos, is coming from Washington, D.C. to share Lessons from the Great Dissenter, discussing the life and legacy of Supreme Court Justice John Marshall Harlan, who famously declared that the United States Constitution is colorblind in his dissent in Plessy v. Ferguson. Prior to his tenure on the Supreme Court, Justice Harlan was a judge here in Frankfort at the Franklin County Courthouse. Peter Cantalos is the author of the 2021 book, The Great Dissenter, The Story of John Marshall Harlan, America's Judicial Hero. This lecture will coincide with a very special America 250 KY event for Frankfort and Franklin County that will be announced soon. We will also have several pop-up lectures throughout the season, including 2 this month, so be sure to pick up a copy of the season schedule in the back and stay tuned to the library's Facebook page and website to keep up. Now back to today's lecture. The Kentucky River is central to Frankfort's identity. It is the main focus of our old and new flags. and for good reason. It's been here in various shapes for hundreds of millions of years. It's part of the oldest geological landmass in Kentucky, dating to the Ordovician period. It's the reason the buffalo carved their trails through Frankfort. It's the reason Native communities called Frankfort home for 11,000 years. It's the reason Frankfort's soil and limestone is ideal for agriculture, horses, and bourbon. It's the reason the McAfee Company and Hancock Taylor surveyed Frankfort in 1773, and Hancock Lee and later Commodore Richard Taylor established the community of Leestown in 1775. It's likely the reason the earliest mention of whiskey and bourbon in Kentucky occurred on its tributaries. It's the reason General James Wilkinson decided to lay out a town called Frank's Ford in 1786, and it's the reason the first steamboat in Kentucky was built at Leestown around 1815. All of these important events laid the foundation for the establishment of Frankfort as a community and as Kentucky's capital. And we're very excited to explore that history by incorporating its ecological and aquatic heritage today. So without further ado, please welcome Adult Services Manager Diane Dehoney to introduce today's speakers.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming out today. As Sean said, my name is Diane Dehoney. I'm the Adult Services Manager here at the Paul Sawyer Public Library. And on behalf of everyone here, we just want to thank you for coming out on this kind of rainy, icky day to learn more about our river. And this is a wonderful crowd and a great way to start off our new year. So thank you so much. It is my great honor to introduce today Dr. Jim Tidwell. He is Professor Emeritus in Aquaculture and Aquatic Sciences from Kentucky State University, having retired in 2023 after 37 years. He was named a Distinguished Professor at KSU in 2014 and received a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019 from the United States Aquaculture Society. He has published over 150 journal publications and is author-editor of 5 books. He developed an interest in the interactions of history and biology of the Kentucky River when he was responsible for the design of a Kentucky River Interpretive Center being planned by Kentucky State. That project included the construction of the Kentucky River Thoroughbred Science Boat, which now serves Frankfort as the Bourbon Belle Tour Boat. Also, I would like to welcome Doug Henley. Doug has a master's degree in fisheries management from South Dakota State University. He's a retired fisheries river research biologist with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. Doug has 27 years of studying fish population dynamics, mainly in the Ohio and Kentucky rivers. Fish species studied include paddlefish, striped bass, largemouth bass, and 3 species of catfish. Please help me to welcome to the podium today, Dr. Jim Tidwell.
As Diane said, really developed the outline for this presentation about 15 years ago. Dr. Size, who was president of KSU at the time, had gone to New York to a meeting, and on the way back, she picked up a New York Times on the plane, and it had a story about a science boat that they had developed in New York, and she came back and she called my boss, Dr. Benson, and me to her office, and she came in, she said, Dr. Benson, I want KSU to have a science boat. And Dr. Benson turned to me and said, Dr. Tidwell, Dr. Size wants KSU to have a science boat. So I didn't have anybody else to turn to, so we started the design of the boat that's now the Bourbon Belle at that time. And we also had the main floor of the old Paul Sawyer. We had a full design and mock-up and lay-up working with a group called Solid Light out of Louisville to do a Kentucky River Interpretive Center, which would be, think of the Salado Center, the Falls of Ohio kind of situation. So I had to present that group with an outline of what the flow of that would be, and never wanted to waste anything. I held on to that for all these years, and came to some of these talks and really enjoyed, and I thought, well, this would be a good way to pull that back out. So what you see here is what was supposed to be the main floor of the old Paul Sawyer if we had had $5, $6, $7 million to put, which we didn't. So we'll cover a lot of territory here. Every one of these slides could be an hour talk of its own, really, as you roll through it. Special thanks to Wendell Haig. Helped me a lot on the mollusk, mussel type information and the host fish that go with that. And you'll see that's quite a bit of it here in just a little bit. So, as John said, Frankfort is a river town, and that's why the city's here. That's a 1871. You'll recognize a few of the things still from way back when. That's Benson Creek coming in. You see the steamboats and the side wheelers coming up through there. So it's always been the reason that Kentucky developed Frankfort, and the reason that Frankfort exists. For quite a long time, we've turned our back on the river. There's efforts now to incorporate more into the city landscape, but sometimes the river fights back on that as well. So big picture, the Kentucky is part of the Mississippi River drainage. So everything within this highlighted section, that water always makes it to the Mississippi, and then the Mississippi makes it out into the Gulf of Mexico. I'll say that again, Gulf of Mexico. We are part of the Ohio River Basin, which means this section drains first to the Ohio River, and then the Ohio River drains to the Mississippi. So we in an unusual way, flow north-northwest, which is not completely unheard of, but the Nile flows north, a few others flow north, but Kentucky's fairly unusual in flowing north for most all of its length. A famous ecologist once said that rivers vary four-dimensionally, so they change vertically. So from their upper to their lower, as that river flows downhill, the characteristics of the water and the ecology of that water changes. Longitudinally, the headwaters and the tailwaters are very different as far as what lives in there, the habitat, the structures, the fish assemblages in that. Horizontally, side to side even. So if we're in the Palisades, the water up against a limestone wall, and the water just on the other side of the river that's flowing against a muddy bank are very different as far as the biology of those two. And then temporally, over time, this river 20 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 10,000 years ago, very different river. So it changes over time as well. There's our map. The true, what we call Kentucky River, goes from the conjunction of the three forks, the North Fork, the Middle Fork, and the South Fork. So the river really starts where they come together and flows out near Carrollton into the Ohio River. So what we call the main stem is the true Kentucky River, and these forks feed into it. Not sure who you are, but glad you're here. So. Kentucky River drains 7,000 square miles of the Commonwealth, travels 255 miles, again, primarily northwest flow from the junction of the three forks till it feeds in the Ohio at Carrollton. I found this interesting as I was digging in. The three forks, the north, middle, and south fork, the elevation drop is 2,500 feet. The whole rest of the river going all the way to the Ohio is only 220 feet. So I'll show you in a second what that implies as far as gravity when we get there. The oldest continuously operating business in the state of Kentucky is the Valley View Ferry, where it crosses the Kentucky River. And I had to slip this in because a very good friend of mine is one of the captains. Just in case he came and was here, I had to cover myself. So. Captain Street is, we go down there and have lunch with him. He calls it boat on a rope. It just goes back and forth. Frankfort is the largest city on the Kentucky River in the entire length. Floods. Talk's not really about floods. Our dams are not really flood control type dams, but you can't talk about the Kentucky River in Kentucky without at least touching on floods and the consequences that they've had. So, when it rains in southeastern Kentucky, and like I said, the elevation drop just in these small runs right here is 10 times the elevation drop of that whole main stem. So when the water comes down those eastern Kentucky forks, it's turbocharged. It is moving fast. I just thought that picture was amazing with that house impaled on a bridge there. So there's a river rise and a drop in Jackson. In the mountains, they call them tides, spring tides. And the floods have been devastating, as we all know, especially in eastern Kentucky. I didn't realize till I dug in that we lost one of our former governors. Bert Combs drowned in '91, driving home from his office. Tried to cross the river, stay alive, you know. He drove into the water apparently, and they found him I think he was 80-something years old. So flooding in Frankfort's not so much determined by the rain in Frankfort as it is the rain in southeastern Kentucky. So it's going to collect in those forks and come down into the main stem. From Hazard, it takes about 3 to 5 days to get here. Jackson, about 2 or 3 days. Beattyville, which is right at the confluence of the three forks, takes about a day and a half, 2 days. So really what we got to watch is what's happening upstream as far as what's going to happen to us in a day or 2 days and 3 days. It's thought that flooding in pre-European times was probably less severe before we cut the timber in eastern Kentucky or mined the land or plowed the land, and the runoff is a lot more substantial now than it probably was in earlier pre-European times. John made mention the river cuts through the limestone in this area. This is called the Jessamine Dome, and it's part of the Cincinnati Arch. Cuts through this Ordovician age limestone. We had a speaker earlier, Phelps. He did a great job. Good enough I went and bought a book afterwards. And he really got deep into the Ordovician limestones and who was there and when. When it cuts through this limestone, that's where the Palisades are formed. We're right at the southern end of the Palisades here. Back in the 20s, when we had more tourism, this area was known, the Palisades were known as the Rhine of America, or the Great Grand Canyon of the East. We used to be a lot more tourist-oriented. People would come and take the waters, and there was resorts and things that you can still find pieces and parts up the river. Get my first biology lesson in here. A lot of people don't realize that limestone is a biological process. Kentucky, 400 or 500 million years ago, looked more like the Bahamas. It was shallow marine waters. All these wee wiggly things lived out there. As they died and left their skeletons, every rock in my flower beds that I build a border out of looks like that right there, you know. And there's right here, we're probably standing on about 800 feet of limestone beneath our feet. So if you do the math of how many of those little guys had to pile up to build up 800 feet, and how wide it is, and how many miles of these, there's a lot of wee beasties deposited out there in the limestone. That limestone is very important, as John said, to our horse industry. The calcium and phosphates build strong bones. Chuck, what does it do? Does it take the iron out? It takes the iron out of the water and makes better bourbon. The calcium does. So we go back to the Paleo Indians. They were migrant hunters. They didn't necessarily set up permanent residence around here, but came in to hunt the big game 10 to 12,000 years ago. They were nomadic. They relied on the waterways for, of course, water, fresh fish, mussels, and game tends to concentrate as it comes to the water to drink, so it was a good hunting place. Later on, some of the archaic Native Americans set up seasonal hunting camps down like Red River Gorge under these rock shelters. They still weren't permanent structures, but they were at least seasonal that they stayed in for weeks or months at a time. The Shawnee, about the time of European, started to come on the scene. Big, nice, pretty much permanent settlements. They had some agriculture, but they also set up their homes and villages very near the river because they relied, and there's recent research saying they probably relied more on the fish and shellfish than maybe on the agriculture that gets all the credit in the history books. But it certainly was important enough that they used these shell middens, these piles of old shells that they built up over the years. That's how they locate a lot of the old Native American village locations, is finding these big, huge piles of shells, and they'll look around and find the village that was associated with them. So the first Europeans to interact with the Kentucky River, I found Gabriel Arthur, 1674. That's 100 years before Daniel Boone. So that's a little deeper history than I was familiar with. And then our famous Harrod and Boone, they came in around Revolutionary War days. Flatboats were used for one-way trips down the river. And then keel boats could be used for return trips, but it was no easy matter. They had to be dragged back upstream. Some of them had sails. Some of them it was manpower. Some of them it was mule power. Either one, it was tough. You know, if you've ever dragged a boat against a current of any kind, it's those are my grandsons, if anybody. Get a plug in there. So pre-impoundment, what was the Kentucky River like before they dammed it up? During low water, the Kentucky was a succession of still water pools interrupted by riffles or rapids or shoals, many names for that. But they were the basic obstructions that kept boats from coming up, especially during low water periods. So they would come, couldn't pass under certain conditions in certain seasons. So there was 34 of these between Frankfort and the Ohio River. So there was a lot of obstructions, a lot of barriers to boats being able to come up. So those 34 riffles have drops of from 6 inches to 3 feet. The series of pools, the pools may be 1/4 mile to 5 miles long, some of them fairly deep and could have been navigated with a boat, but you could only get from this riffle to that riffle within that. So a lot of barriers, a lot of obstructions to commerce. So pre-impoundment, the early steamboats could only get as far as Fish Trap Island. So that's Benson Creek right there. So that island is under the water that's impounded by the lock and dam at Lock 4 right here. So it sits right outside of the mouth and below where Benson Creek came in. It had a grist mill, it had a lumber mill, but the river boats couldn't get past it, the riffles on each side of it. So it was a barrier because most of the boats wanted to dock over on this side. So they couldn't really get up around that Fish Trap Island to get to the primary part of Frankfort, the city. So when the George Madison came here in 1820, the local newspaper saying, the river being full, the citizens had an opportunity of witnessing for the first time the operation of a steamboat before our town. So about 1820, the first one was able to come up. Most of these were side wheelers, not our classic stern wheeler that most of us picture with a steamboat. So Frankfort steamboat commerce was only intermittent up in 1835. The natural conditions of the Kentucky River only allowed seasonal access. Dry months, July through October, the low flow exposed those riffles and blocked long distance transit. November to June, there was enough water to bring the boats up if you were brave enough to run against what were likely flood tides. And then you had to deal with all the different snags and logs and things that would waiting on a chance to punch a hole in the bottom of your boat as you tried to come up. So even back in the 1700s and pioneer times, Kentuckians talked about being able to develop the Kentucky River into a more reliable artery for civilization and primarily commerce. So in 1835, a surveyor group was hired by the state, the Commonwealth, to look at that. What would it take to start to build impoundments, to build a lock and dam system that would allow reliable transport the length of the river. First thing they did was go where the river dumps out into the Ohio, and they looked at marks showing low water area, and they looked around till they find where, and you look around, you find stuff up in the trees that are washed in. It was 57 feet difference between low water and high water right there. So in their report, they said designing locks and dams to deal with a 57-foot rise in the river is going to be quite difficult. So they knew going in that this was going to be a hard project. But in 1836, the Commonwealth began to build its own locks and dams on the Kentucky River. The intent was to improve commercial prosperity, to get bluegrass agricultural products, tobacco, grains, bourbon, out and down the river to New Orleans and other markets, but also to go further up to the Appalachians, tap into the timber resources, the coal, and be able to bring them down the river and also sell and export them using the river for transport. The state, when it started to build a system, used these timber crib dams. You know, when you go out and you look at our dams today, they're big concrete, but they built basically big wooden cribs, filled them with rocks, and then capped them over with big timbers. Probably because it was cheap. They didn't have the resources to do more. So in 1840, there was enough of this done that the first boat was able to lock through. They had to rig the lock to get it to open up and let the boat through. But 1840, the first boat locked through to Frankfort. By 1842, there was 5, 1 through 5 were completed. So about half, less than half of the river's length had reliable slack water, which is mean that you can navigate even in low water conditions, navigation. They collected tolls on boats coming through to fund the operation and maintenance of those locks and dams using that toll money that was collected. That's our lock number 4. That's our dam number 4 is a timber crib dam. They're out there working on it. That's the Kentucky River hemp mill. That's where Jim's Seafood did sit till not too long ago. So they had a good collection of mill artifacts in there. 1849, the Commonwealth is trying to keep this system patched together using those tolls. I had a cholera epidemic break out. The cholera spread up from New Orleans on the steamboats that we're now able to get to, broke out in Frankfort. Took it just a couple of weeks to really break out in an epidemic in Frankfort. Thomas Kahn is a superintendent in charge of doing the repairs and maintenance on the locks and dams, died in the cholera epidemic. So that set them back even more. During the Civil War, they were not able to do any real maintenance. The Union Army built some of them enough that they could get boats up to go to Camp Nelson, but did just enough to keep them operable so they could use them. The Union Army did during the Civil War. At the close of the war, the system was considered to be practically worthless. And by the 1870s, the floods were breaching the dams, and they pretty much collapsed and failed by 1876. 1878, the local Frankfort newspaper actually told coal and lumber shippers they ought to just go up and tear out Dam 5 so that at least they could get coal to Frankfort and some of the lumber to Frankfort. And really at that point, all it was doing was hindering navigation on the river. And they recommended that they go up and rip it out. While destructive, these floods, or what they call tides, they were important for transporting especially logs, but also flatboats of coal and things like that on the spring tides down from eastern Kentucky to downstream markets, including Frankfort. So in 1880, the state of Kentucky ceded control of the Kentucky River to Washington. By 83, the Corps of Engineers came in, and they had locks and dams 1 through 5 back up and running. A lot more resources when you put the feds to work out there. So there's, by 83, they had it operating. This is about late 80s, 90. That's the steamboat Falls City pulling up into Lock 4. And this was a steamboat, that's Dick's River tying into the Kentucky River. And there was traffic all the way up and down through there. And the steamboats operated some seasonally at times, but reliably at other times. For almost 100 years, there was steamboat traffic out there. And that would be a great, I love steamboats, that'd be a great whole talk of its own. Yeah. So for 30 years, the Corps worked on that project. They built 9 more locks and dams. They made it all the way. Lock number 14 was right up at where the 3 forks come together, and they completed that in 1917. So at that point, we had a fully engineered waterway from the Ohio to the conjunction of the forks. However, at the same time, what it was meant to service, steamboat commerce, pretty much ground to a halt. It was already out of date. Time waits on no one. While they were doing all these locks and dams, timber companies were building railroads. They were building roads and highways. So really about the time they completed the 14 lock system, it was obsolete when it was built. That's a good look at our system from Lock 1 to Lock 14. There's the forks. There's none on the forks. The last one is right at the junction. Kentucky River Basin, 255 miles, 42 counties, and 14 locks and dams. And a lot of you guys that grew up north of here or up toward Ohio, very familiar with the ones. This is Frankfort, but even some of these Monterey and up through there. I thought that was pretty cool. This just shows the elevations of the different pools backed up by the different dams and gives you a good feel how it drops. It's all gravity powered, including the locks and the drop that it goes through from 14 down to the Ohio River. So how does damming impact the aquatic animals that are out there and their habitats that go along with them? So it interrupts connectivity. All these big rivers tie together. There's no real barriers under most situations. So by building all these dams, we interrupt that connectivity of the rivers, and this affects the fish's migration, especially spawning, foraging. It changes the sediment regime of the river and its morphology. There's less rocky shoals and more dark, silty bottoms. Changes the flow patterns, changes even the temperature patterns of the river. affects their reproduction, their foraging, and how they overwinter. So throw a few terms in here. When we talk about flowing water, that's called a lotic system. Still water is a lentic system. So pre-impoundment, we were pretty much dealing with flowing lotic systems before the dams, and it turned them into really a series of reservoirs or ponds. So we went from rivers and streams to a series of 14 reservoirs. That affects the current. A flowing system has current, of course. Their temperature tends to vary more with that flowing water. It's more closely tied to the air temperature when it's moving like that. Once you slow it down and make it deep, it tends to hold temperature and doesn't change as much. Flowing water system tends to have much higher dissolved oxygen levels. That more varied in a reservoir type system, a daily swing. Flowing water system, greater habitat diversity, which supports a greater biological diversity. When we impound them, less habitat diversity, less biological diversity. Before and after the dams, we had long stretches of connectivity before the dams. Certain species that make these long spawning runs could no longer make long runs. They were blocked by the dams. That is very important to some of the species we'll see in just a minute. A flowing water system gets more of its nutrients washing in off the land as the source of the nutrients, where a reservoir system is more of a closed system. It produces more of its own nutrition and food. Before impoundment, the body is less plankton-based. A reservoir system's more plankton-based. And the pre-impoundment, the flowing water system, more of a clean gravel bottom that's very important for a lot of species. And the bottom of a reservoir or pond tends to look more like silt. And when you see anything that's dark, really dark colored or smelly in an aquatic system, there's no oxygen down there. That smell and black color comes from a low oxygen environment. So more of those in a reservoir type system. Kentucky fish populations. We have a very diverse group of fish in Kentucky. We have over 245 native species, another 24 or 25 that have been added either on purpose or by accident. We're second and third. We're behind only Alabama and Tennessee in terms of freshwater fish diversity. However, most of those fish, over 80%, are non-game species. They're not the bass and bluegill and things that people go fishing for, or that Fish and Wildlife really cares a lot about. Those are the game species. So the non-game don't get as much attention. But the non-game species are very important in terms of the health of the system and also as indicators of the health of the system. So these species are signs of poor stream health or imbalanced ecosystems when you see them eliminated toward certain species, especially those more adapted to a reservoir environment. I'm out of practice teaching classes. The throat doesn't. So when the early settlers came, they, as everybody is, if they catch a big fish, they're proud of it and they report it. So they reported catching sturgeon as big as a full-grown man, paddlefish that were almost as large. 1775, Nicholas Creswell came down from the Pacific down the Ohio and paddled up the Ohio River, and he was excited. He caught a 40-pound catfish. I would be too. Fishing was so important that they started stocking the river, the Kentucky Fish Commission, in 1877. So, and then even back when they were working on the early construction of the locks and dams, right here in Frankfort, John Mason Brown in the 1880s pushed for them to install fish ladders in the dams so that the fish could get past the dams. They knew it was going to be a problem when they built it, but they didn't have the money to design that in. So we use the term a fish assemblage, and that's a description of who all's in there, how many of them, the biodiversity, the habitat quality, and the overall ecosystems are all indicated by what the fish assemblage is in there. So if we go up to the upper reaches of the Kentucky, up towards the forks, the fish assemblage is more like a stream or a small river, almost like you'd see in the Elkhorn type thing. But again, remember what the ecologist says, as you go down the river, everything changes. So even within the lower, this is even before it was impounded, when you got down toward the Ohio River, it looked more like a large river fish assemblage downriver. But once we impounded it, and I want to thank Fish and Wildlife for giving us access to the originals of these that were painted by Frankfort's own Rick Hill, who's an amazing artist. And I appreciate them letting us use the originals on these. So even before it was impounded, the fish assemblage changes as we go down. But once we impound it, post-impoundment, it all looks pretty much like a reservoir system as far as who's found in that system. And it tends to be less diverse and fewer of these bottom, like darters and those kind of species. I like to throw a gee whiz in there and wake everybody up there. I said, did you know you share the river with these guys? So there's some big fish out there. I didn't even know these guys were out there till one of our neighbors, Doug and I live on River Valley Road. That's part of our interest. Showed me a picture of a muskie, and I was like, where'd you catch that? Right out there. I was like, wow. So these were just gee whiz pictures, really, with the paddlefish and a big gar and a flathead catfish and a big blue catfish. But that's what that's who's swimming under you when you're out there on your pontoon boat. So a little bit of a vocabulary lesson as we get into these. When we change from a flowing water system to a series of reservoirs, we'll talk a little bit about extirpated species, and that means basically local extinction. They're still alive. They're out there somewhere. They're not extinct. They're just not here anymore. So it's like a local extinction. And then we'll talk about some that are very negatively impacted. They're still out there. They're still alive, but they can't sustain their populations. They can no longer reproduce under the conditions we've put them in. How do we know what was out there before we built these locks and dams? How do we know what was there pre-impoundment? One of the most famous naturalists and biologists was Rafinesque. He was a professor at Transy, and the closest river he could get to do his studies was the Kentucky River. So he came to the Kentucky and sampled, and he named over 100 species. You know, these days, you've made your biological career if you name one, you know, and he named over 100. So a lot of the fish that we're very familiar with were named by Rafinesque in the 1800s. And he was a contemporary with Audubon, who was also in Western Kentucky. And then post-impoundment, how do we know what was there when Rafinesque compared to what's there now? We have these atlases that are compiled for fish and mussels, and Wendell was primary on doing the mussel one here. So that's how it's not definitive. None of these are really sampled that much, especially down to the smaller species to see who isn't here. Some of this will be educated guess or conjecture or whatever term you want to use, but based on the best science we could find. So one of them is the blue sucker. Once there was huge migrations of these fish, and the early pioneers were able to harvest them, and that was really a food staple. And they're very rare. You can hardly find one today. So it's like the homing pigeon. You know, used to they clouded out the sun, and now they're not there. Well, this is a fish version of that. And it was a very important food source for the pioneers when they came here. They're no longer here. We don't think of this one, but the American eel. The eels lived in this. They lived in all that gray area there. have a very complicated reproductive cycle. That mature eel has to swim all the way down the Ohio, all the way down the Mississippi, out into the Gulf of Mexico, and out into the Sargasso Sea to reproduce. And then the little baby eels have to turn around and go all the way back up. So with all the dams, they're not either able to make either the spawn and run down or the elver run back up. So they're no longer here. And rather than drawing through them one by one, all of these guys are considered to be extirpated or likely extirpated. A lot of these are the little darter species, which we don't think of, about as big as your finger, just to give you a context. And then some of these chubs are maybe a little bit more, but not much more. But we'll see in a minute, small and mighty, they're very important to a lot of the other animals that live into the river. One of the ones we consider to be very negatively impacted is paddlefish, American paddlefish. There's only one other in the world, a Chinese paddlefish, that probably is extinct because of the dam building on the Yangtze River over there. So it's considered to likely be extinct, which would mean there's one paddlefish left. We did a lot of work on these up at KSU in our program. They make a long spawning run like a salmon does. They want to go way up the river. And they want to spawn on clean gravel. So now they can't make a long run up the river. They're blocked by the dams. And the clean gravel is now more filled with silt and sediment. And they can't use those. The eggs suffocate if they're able to spawn them. Sturgeons, we used to have shovel nose. We used to have a lake, which can get 4 to 6 feet long. That's probably the one that the pioneer caught and said it was big as a man. They both make long migratory spawning runs. They both need clean, rocky substrates to be able to lay their eggs and have them succeed in hatching. And we don't have either one of those anymore. Another one was the skipjack herring, which I wasn't really familiar with. It used to be big runs of these, pretty large fish. Big part, it's a quote downstream effect. When they're gone, now we're starting to impact the mussel populations, because some of the mussels require this fish as an intermediate host to be able to reproduce in there. So the dams block the skipjack's migration, and vicariously negatively impacted the reproduction of the mussels that don't migrate, but now they couldn't reproduce because of that. Speaking of mussels, the mussels are considered ecosystem engineers. They're filter feeders. They sit down in the bottom constantly as they breathe, pump water in, pump water out. They harvest the algae and bacteria and nutrients out of the water, cleaning the water. They're filter feeders and literally filtering out the water, and each one will filter up to 10 gallons a day that they're cleaning up out there, kind of like an oyster does down on the coast. Today, 45% of the freshwater mussel species in North America are considered threatened or extinct. So they're one of the most threatened populations of animals on the planet. Before it was impounded, the Kentucky River had one of the most diverse mussel populations on planet Earth. Of the 100 species or so found in the Commonwealth, at least 60 of them were found in the Kentucky River. Now only about 30, about half remain. Of the 30 no longer found out there, 2 of them are probably extinct. So the mussels have a very unusual, complex life cycle. They have to have a host. Their larvae are basically parasites on fish for a certain part of this life cycle, where these glaucidia have to attach usually to the gills of the fish to be able to reproduce. This is still amazing to me. The mussels form these lures That's the mussel sitting down there looking up like that in his fleshy mantle. And he's produced this little fake minnow so that the bass or whoever comes down and says, that looks tasty, I'm going to eat that. So when he does, and he comes down and he grabs that lure, this guy just explodes and shoots these Glacidia up into his mouth, and they attach to his gill and tap into his blood system, and they develop from there. So it's the most amazing thing. You can see these with a video, and it's even, I mean, I'd bite it if I was out there. So, yeah. So some mussels are generalist, but some have to have a species. They can't use any other species. So that really puts them at risk. So if something happens to the fish species, it also happens to the mussel that's dependent on it. So some of the mussel species that are considered to be extirpated is the ebony shell, which is a big mussel, elephant ear, which again is a big mussel. These were important back when they used to harvest these guys to make buttons, pearl buttons. And that doesn't sound like it. There's tons and tons and tons of these guys that were harvested. And both of these guys that are considered extirpated utilize that skipjack herring that we were talking about earlier. So when the herring was gone, the mussels went with them. A lot of them also depend on the darters, or these little guys about big as your finger that live down in the clean gravel and sand and that big slide we showed you. When the darters were extirpated, then that took the mussels out that depended on those particular fish. We also have right here in Frankfort, Kentucky, one of the best labs for freshwater mollusk conservation really in the United States, if not the world. So a lot of people don't realize that resource is here out at the forks of the Elkhorn, the mollusk conservation fisheries. They're working not only on the reproducing the mussels, but in some cases reproducing the fish they depend on, and then looking at ways to artificially raise the mussels. And if we can ever clean up the environment or produce an environment that's ready, now we know how to reproduce these guys and put them back into the wild and restock the system. So dams are a mixed blessing. If you're a boat captain, you want them. You want to be able to navigate up the river. They're important for water supply. They're important for recreation. However, there are very negative impacts on the natural aquatic fauna and the water quality of the system. They alter it, as we talked about, from a cool, shallow, high oxygen environment into a warm, deep, less oxygenated standing water environment. This decreases species richness out there. In particular, the dams have decimated the freshwater mussel populations. So in recent decades, there's been a big trend across the whole United States to go in and take out dams. And especially out in the Northwest, up in the Northeast, it's a very big trend, and there's people pushing hard. Why? Riffles, I said, where the action is. Larimore, is that you? Up there. Is that you? No. So it's really the riffles. The bad guys as far as being able to transit the river is the riffles. The good guys, if you're interested in fishing mussels, it's also the riffles. So the riffles are where the action is, good and bad. So fishing mussels, that acts like a big aerator, keeping oxygen levels. It keeps the gravel clean. That's important to the darters and the reproduction of a lot of the fish that we talked about. So one close to home, in just 2021, they took out a dam right outside of Jim Beam. There'd been a number of drownings over the years. People maybe weren't up to the level of kayaking that they thought they were. They go over that dam and get in the hydraulic there and get caught, even people trying to go around it. So They took it out, restore the ecology of the creek, but also very much remove a safety hazard for canoeists and kayakers. Down in the Green River, they've taken out 3 dams. 4, 5, and 6 have already been removed. That's considered now a very significant bioreserve in that area. The Kentucky River, according to a friend of mine, has the potential to be a bioreserve that matches or exceeds the Green River if we were able to remove some of these dams. So could some of those 14 dams be removed to restore the ecology? Depends on the dam, maybe not. So I call this dams, can't live with them, can't live without them, or damned if you do and damned if you don't. So back in the drought, this is the other side of the case. Back in the drought of the 30s, we figured out that the water supply of central Kentucky is actually fairly precarious. Back then, the locks and dams and reservoirs were there, but due to leakage of the dams, evaporation during the drought, the water levels got so low they were trucking water to the cities around us in the 30s. 82, there was a task force that looked, and they asked the Corps to keep operating locks 1 through 4, primarily to be sure that we were able to maintain those pools to pull our drinking water out of. They asked them to maintain and repair, because these were out of repair, locks and dams 5 to 14 to keep them from failing. Some of them are at risk of just blowing out. Drought of 88, they were reminded how precarious we are. They had to close the locks to not let them open them up and let the water flow through to run the lock, keep the water behind the dam, to store water for the communities to be able to use. In 2002, commercial shipping ceased. The last load of sand and gravel came up. The Corps said, we're only here for commercial traffic. Last load, we're out. And they wanted to step away. And then we start thinking, well, if they step away, no commercial traffic, what about our drinking water situation? And that became the emphasis at that point, was even though we've got to be able to maintain these pools to be able to maintain access to water. Can't live with them, can't live without them. Kentucky River is a major source of drinking water for probably 1 million people. Frankfort, Richmond, Nicholasville, a lot of Lexington, Winchester, Versailles, Lawrenceburg. And the river basin is the most densely populated major river basin in Kentucky. If a dam blew out, or if the water dropped so low that the intakes couldn't reach it anymore, we lose access to the drinking water. Laura, I won't be able to sing tonight, I don't think. Just wanted you to know. Yeah. Also, during that 88 drought, we found that contamination during those low water events was a big deal. I wasn't familiar how big a deal apparently the swimming beach at Fort Boonesboro was. I think that was like the Daytona of Kentucky. I mean, it was. So it was a big deal when they shut it down. I don't think it's ever really come back online as a swimming beach. Bacterial contamination, E. coli. And that bacteria is from bad or poor municipal watershed treatment, failing septic systems. A lot of these little neighborhoods have what they call packet treatment systems that don't get maintained and basically become straight pipes out. A lot of eastern Kentucky, Ken Bates did me a map showing me all the straight pipes in eastern Kentucky, and you couldn't get it all in a map. You know, it was. And agriculture runoff, also our livestock. All that runs to the river. Everything goes to the river. So when that low flow situations occur, this stuff accumulates and doesn't flush on down. So Ken Bates did this one for me. Where we get our drinking water is also where we put our wastewater. So if we look, these are the cities, these are water treatment plants, And these are the wastewater treatment. So if we find one and we look, I can't find Frankfort. I moved the map around. So we're taking it out there and dumping it in right there. I mean, and if you look, almost every one of them, there's a midway. So we're literally dumping it in one end and pulling it out in the other end, and hopefully pulling it out before we dump it in most cases. But I love this quote out of Hazard. Old saying in Hazard's, "Oh, go ahead and flush the toilet. Lexington needs the water." You know, so kind of gives you a context. We're all sharing the same system here. Little biological pollution, invasive carps. These are in the news. You see in Western Kentucky, it's a big deal. These are the ones that jump in the boat and hit people. You don't see a lot of it here. Doesn't mean they're not here. So they're pretty much confirmed to be in the drainage. Are they up this far? Some of these species? You've not sampled them?
I've not seen silver.
You've not seen silver? You've seen big heads up this far? So silvers are the big jumpers. They'll all jump, but silvers are the big jumpers. They feed on phytoplankton. They're filter feeders. Big heads feed on zooplankton, microscopic animals, which are very important to our young sport fish in their ability. That's what they eat. So grass carp feed on the vegetation. Black carp, maybe not here yet, but they're definitely down in the Ohio and looking for a chance to come up. They eat freshwater mussels, so they could be particularly devastating to our remaining mussel populations. Actually, the locks and dams maybe are helping hold them back. They also can't make that long run up through there. Biological pollution in terms of our bivalves, our clams and mussels. What we do have out there, the population is now dominated by two non-native species, our zebra mussels, which came in from Eastern Europe in the 80s and now have moved all the way across the country. They can out-compete our native species and they disrupt the food webs. Corbicula is an Asian freshwater clam. Again, they compete for food with our native species, and they've been shown to negatively impact the growth of some of those native species. A little more local pollution issues. This is the Jim Beam fire in 2019. A big fire took out one of the aging barns, dumped into the river, and that black plume you see right there is when that ethanol flows out into the water. That's what the river looked like, the black plume coming out through there. And remember what I said, whenever you see dark or black in an aquatic environment, whether it be the mud or means no oxygen. So that tells you what's going on over there in that black plume coming out through there. We had a wild turkey warehouse just a year later in Lawrenceburg. Dumped 17,000 gallons of bourbon into the river. The ethanol causes a bacterial bloom. So the bacteria is what's consuming. It eats the ethanol and then they consume the oxygen out of the river. They sent these barges out with big pumps to try to pull it up and pump it and try to aerate. And I told Doug, I said, well, I saw him out there and I was like, guys, yeah. You think of that river, how deep, how wide, how many gallons, and they got E for effort for trying, and that, you know. So the ethanol comes up, the bacteria bloom that's eating the ethanol, and they consume the oxygen. So even with all these efforts, about 200,000 fish were estimated to die, and it was one of the worst fish kills in state history. So what does the future look like? Well, none of us know, but according to some of the institutes, U of L has a big sustainability, climate change institute. UK has a big program looking. And if you glean through some of their predictions that they're making in terms of what climate change may represent for our future, they predict more floods and extreme rains, more frequent downpours, That washes more stuff into the river. But also more droughts and low flows. So not just floods, but droughts. Those hotter periods, that water gets stagnant. It starts to consume more oxygen. The temperature goes up, which warm water holds less oxygen than cool water. Water quality degradation, all that runoff from those big rains, more pollutants. And now, we're getting 95% of our drinking water, and we're washing more stuff into it. And then infrastructure strain. Our water treatment plants quite often out of date. The pipes feeding are largely out of date. We've gone through some of that. So that aging infrastructure is going to struggle with the strains that come with some of these changes. So the future, what I put, volatility and variability. So it's not so much the absolute. A lot of it is the big swings are the big problems. It said more rains, more droughts, more rains. So it's that bipolar swing is what really is going to cause a lot of the big problems. So our April 25 flood, a Northern Kentucky Tribune article quoted that climate change, some of the people doing scientific modeling said, yeah, April flood was made worse by climate change. The intensity, even if it's small, there's a tipping point. There's critical structure points that matters. And if you get those bigger swings, we came within 2.5 feet of topping the flood wall during this past one. And those big swings, so maybe we don't get more in a year, but maybe we get it all at once, like a monsoon season kind of situation. So if you go back and look, like I said, we came close to topping the wall. So in the past 88 years, since 37, we've had a 200-year flood, a 200-year flood, a 100 to 150-year flood, and a 75 to 100-year flood. So not within 100 years, in less than 100 years, we've had two 200-year floods and 200-year floods in 88 years. So again, that shows you the impact of change and also the variability and big swings that are coming. So who addresses these problems? There's a number of groups, important groups, that have, I guess, lead authority really is the Kentucky River Authority. Division of Water deals with a lot of the pollution type things. Nature Conservancy's involved in some of those, taking out the dams and those kind of things. Kentucky Waterways Alliance is a statewide. Right here in Frankfort, many of our friends, Woods and Water Land Trust, involved with the lower Kentucky and doing good work there. Fish and Wildlife deals with the populations and monitoring and especially of like the invasive species. They increased the bounty on the Asian carps. Did you see that? Try to increase the catch. Recommended reading, some of my resources and our resources. A really readable book that does a good job, covers a whole lot of the same territory. Bill Ellis was at EKU, is a historian at EKU in 2000, the Kentucky River. This is the core document that they produced that covers really the survey and the building, the construction of all the locks and dams. It's really, to me, it's an amazing document to get into. And I think it's available as a full PDF online, so you can access that for free. I think the Ellis book's $12 or something. Our own Richard Taylor worked with the Palisades, so it's kind of a coffee table book. Beautiful pictures of the Palisades, a lot more on endangered species that are found only in that Palisades type environment, and a really nice mix of text by Richard and beautiful photos by Adam Jones. The original Kentucky was part of a national series, River Series, by our own Thomas D. Clark, originally published in '42. It's more stories of historical events on the Kentucky River. And one of our speakers coming up soon, John, is Bogart he wrote this Kentucky River Packets. What's he doing it on Commerce? On the Kentucky River coming up. Is he here? Thank you, sir. Questions? So I'm through on my part. I brought my two experts, so if anybody have a question.
If you'll just raise your hand, I'll bring you the mic so
John?
we can hear you on TV. There you go.
Oh my gosh. How many hydroelectric projects are operating at the dams?
I think the one at Dix River's not technically on the river, so they have a small one that dams the Dix River. What do you know? 7 has a little one. It's one of those technologies that's really come a long way. They could probably retrofit some of those, but that's maybe 2 if you count Dix River. Part of it is these are low-head dams. So they're not good flood control dams, and they're not good hydroelectric dams because the generators need a big drop. And these, you've been to Lock 4 and looked out from Jim Seafood, it just kind of dribbles over, So it's not a big, gravity's not pushing real hard right there. So.
What's your relationship with the Thomas More University Bio up on the Ohio River?
I personally have had little interaction with them. They're more on the river. Have you worked with them in there?
They'd be more
Yeah, but you did Ohio River work. Yeah, you didn't interact with them. I've had little interaction with them personally. My background is more on the hatchery rearing side. Within the training of aquatic ecology to kind of pull this together, but I've not personally. They're very much Ohio River focused, to what I'm aware of. Yeah. Richard?
Jim, in the last couple of years, in its wisdom, the General Assembly has passed legislation that suspends EPA monitoring of waters coming from eastern Kentucky. My question is whether or not that has had a palpable effect on the quality of water in the Kentucky River.
I can't answer it, but I'd say it will have, and on the federal level, Congress has been pulling back. I get emails from the National Waterways Alliance daily or weekly to, call your representative, because they're redefining what are the waters, They're trying to take out wetlands as being regulated and monitored and a bunch, and pull those out. So our protections are being eroded in some cases quite rapidly under the current environment. John?
Has it ever been proposed? You suggested maybe some of the dams could be removed, but maybe not all of them. I just wondered if that would happen, would that increase the flow, which would help the things that live there, and also would it increase flow, which would make hydroelectric more feasible?
It would free up the riffles, would be where a lot of the clean gravel, the darters, the reproduction of some of the species like paddlefish and sturgeons that need those kind of environments. It would restore those riffles that are important to a lot of the species. It would not necessarily increase the flow. The same number of gallons a minute are going to come down the river, whether one of these little low-head dams slows them down for a little while or not, and again, the hydroelectric, they have a lot of new technologies that are almost screw-type technologies instead of big water wheels that can use lower-head environments. I know some groups have looked at them and even made economic proposals to retrofit them in, but I don't know of any. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Oh, right here. Oh, no. Oh. I thought you had a question. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tidwell. Appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us. John, do you have any announcements? Okay, we'll let John share a couple things with you, and we hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate it, and thank you, Mr. Henley, for helping out with that. And just wanted to announce real quick that our next lecture which is a pop-up, is Monday, January 22nd at 6 p.m. So that's, I believe, is that a Tuesday, Diane? It's a Thursday. Okay, and that is Portray Me, A Look into Liberty Hall's Portraiture by Sophia Watson, their new interpreter and art historian. So please come out for that. And then our reschedule from last month is Dr. Charlene Fletcher, the Francis S. Fessler Assistant Professor of History at Butler University, who has done 10 years worth of research on Frankfort's former Kentucky Penitentiary, and particularly her presentation is about, it's called Home Ain't Always Where the Heart Is, Black Women in Confinement in the Gilded Age of Bluegrass, with a special focus on the Kentucky Penitentiary. And she's just getting ready to come out with a new book on that topic, so please come out for that. She's coming from Indianapolis, so thank you so much.